Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Theology Threads. My name is Dr. Brian Jenkins, and I'm going to be joined today by my buddy Miles Langrock. And we're both thrilled to have you with us today as we discover how the thread of the gospel message of Jesus is woven into our everyday lives. Each episode, we will discuss and unpack various ideas, values, and feelings about our world and what the Bible has to teach us. So let's follow the thread together in today's episode of Theology Threads.
All right, here we go.
Here we go.
We are on kind of the final leg, the ending of this series. This part of
the series has 3 parts, so this is the final of the second part.
Yeah. And so we introduced part of your kind of main understanding of Christianity and your endeavor to kind of keep that simple and be able to communicate it effectively. And so we have 4 main points of this creed, right?
Yeah.
So those 4 are God made it,
right?
We broke it, Jesus fixes it, and today we're talking about how the church shares it.
The church shares it. That's right.
So it's important to define terms so we know what it is we're talking about. So let's start off with what is it?
What is it? What is the it?
It's my favorite one to start off with.
Yeah, well, because the it actually, if you're paying attention to the 4 main teachings of the church, it changes, which is it's kind of subtle. But so when we talk about it, ultimately, what are we sharing? And it is the gospel, that heartbeat message of reconciliation, that the church ultimately is the means by which God chose to share the message of Jesus Christ to the world. And that comes into all kinds of things because people want the church to be all sorts of things, and the church is not all sorts of things, in my opinion. The church can use sorts of things, and if we can get into those sorts of things, and we'd love to get into those sorts of things, but ultimately, it is the vehicle. It is the way that God has chosen. The church is the eternal, is this gospel truth, the idea of being reconciled to God. I think of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in around verse 11, where Paul talks about being ambassadors. He uses this metaphor, and he says, this is our message, be reconciled to God. And so what is it? It is the gospel. It is the fact that we are reconciled to God out of our sin, that Jesus fixes it, and that reconciliation comes through grace alone. So that's what the it is.
And we could spend a whole lot of time talking about that, the message of Jesus Christ, the good news, the good news.
Right.
So, okay, that's part of that phrase that the church shares it, right? So that's what it is. It is the sharing of the good news. But let's back up. What is the church? How long has the church been a thing? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the church, that's kind of like, that's a massive question. What is the church? Who is the church? We think of, and you hear all sort of these cliches, the church is people, it's not a building. The church is a place of worship. At our church, we often say that the church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. There's all these sorts of things. But I think one of the best ways to look at the church in terms of the pattern, the biblical pattern, the thread of the church is that it is the continuing community of God's people, which have been called out from the surrounding culture to point people to Him. So it's the continuing community of God's people. So we can take a look at that, and then called out from culture to point people back to God, or to point people. So that, and now that would be the gospel. So the church starts in this idea of just being God's people. There's actually a book, I actually have it here. I wasn't even planning this to be a segue, but we'll do it. It's The Bible and Mission by Richard Bachman, and it's this great look at kind of how those covenants play in. So there's a form of Christianity that when you talk about covenants, and when we say covenants, if you're not familiar with church, with that word, a covenant's a promise. It's a contract and a promise kind of all put together. So one of the theories is that God has made a covenant with people over the years. And there's one theory that says that every time the covenant gets violated by humanity, God creates a new one. And that's called dispensationalism, that there was the covenant in the garden, we broke it, here's your new covenant. Well, that's the we broke that, so we get the Noah covenant. Well, we break that so we get the Abram covenant, right? We break that so we get the Exodus covenant. Then we get the Davidic covenant.
We
then
keep breaking things, man.
Yeah. This is why we don't have nice things, right?
I don't know. Today we're talking about the nicest thing of all, which is the good news.
Yeah, it's the good news, but
he still keeps it even though we keep breaking it.
Which is, okay, you said something unintentionally, but it was pretty important. He keeps giving us things even though we keep breaking it. So my contention is that there's really only one covenant, that God will have his people and people will have their God and they'll dwell together forever. And that every time that covenant gets disrupted, it's not a new covenant, but it is a renewal or a return to the heart of the original covenant. Now, I know people will say, well, Brian, even Jesus says, the new covenant in my blood. Yes, they do, because the standards of the covenant are changed in Christ. But ultimately, from Genesis all the way to the book of Revelation, the story is, I will be your God, you will be my people, and we'll dwell together forever. So Bachman talks about, in the Old Testament, you have this idea of a family. God calls out a family under Abraham. And he says, you're going to bless the nations. Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. I will make you a blessing to the nations. Genesis 18:18. Genesis 22:18. Genesis 26 and 4. Genesis 28:14. Like they just keep coming out, okay? Well, then that family essentially becomes a larger community. It becomes a tribe, and then it becomes this traveling nomad nation sort of thing called Israel. So we go from Abraham, he is meant to be, his calling out is meant to be a blessing to the nations, okay? Then you go to Israel, their separation from the world around them is meant to be also a blessing to the nations. I just think that gets overlooked a lot, to be perfectly honest with you. I think people don't quite see that as this sort of key idea. And there's a verse I want to make sure I point out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just
while I'm looking.
When you're saying that gets overlooked, are you talking about the fact that Israel being set apart or called out and distinct from the nations is meant as a blessing to the nations? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes what gets overlooked is that Israel was intended to be what we would now call an evangelistic vehicle. Okay,
we talked about that last episode
that
too.
It was meant to, Israel in and of itself as a nation was meant to bring people into the kingdom of God.
Like Rahab would be a great example.
So here's Exodus chapter 19, right? It says, you yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So there's the formation of the people. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, so he's about to launch into the covenant of Exodus chapter 20, 10 commandments, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So what he's saying is, I'm going to use you, Israel, as my special people so that all nations can have relationship with me. And we see that sort of play out again and again. And even in the prophets, one of the reasons that Israel finds itself condemned later is because they don't fulfill this particular nuance of their relationship.
Like Jonah wouldn't be a stretch because he's going to Nineveh, is that right?
So Jonah is going to pronounce a judgment over Nineveh in the book of Jonah
so that
they would come and they would be saved.
Yeah. That
they would find salvation in God. Mm-hmm. And so when he refuses to do that, he's the one who gets judged. I look at like the dedication of the temple in 1 Kings chapter 8. It says this, as for the foreigner who does not belong to your people, Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name, this is them speaking to God, and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm, when they come and pray toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel. And so when they're even dedicating the temple, they're saying, this is going to be so beautiful and so amazing and so great. It's going to draw people here from all over the world, and they will know you as we do in covenant relationship. So you have this idea of Abraham getting this calling, okay? You have this idea of Israel as a nation get calling, and then there's this kingdom that's coming one day that's going to be huge and awesome and fantastic and has this king. And we see that in like the 99th Psalm and especially the 72nd Psalm, where this idea of this divine king ruling over people, being merciful to the nations, demonstrating God's grace and goodness so that all the peoples of the earth find him. So if we're following the thread, which is what we're here to do, we see that there is the calling of Abraham, and then as his family grows and turns into the nation of Israel, they are called. And then when they are restored, there is this far-off kingdom in their restoration. But all of them have in common this idea of bringing people to God, okay? So let's flip that over now to the New Testament.
Yeah, I love that we talk about church and you went straight Old Testament.
Yeah, because people say things. So people say ridiculous things all the time about the Bible. They do. Well, first off, people say ridiculous things all the time.
In general.
Yeah. And I am one of them. I do enjoy saying a ridiculous thing.
Yeah, I watched a couple of episodes of Theology Threads, and we say some ridiculous things.
We
sometimes.
do say some ridiculous things, okay? But when it comes to the church, I don't think I say ridiculous things.
No.
Yeah.
Just Algorithmic Bears is the one that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait to see those guys live this summer. But the idea then of people will say things like, well, I once heard a preacher say this, you know why there are no gospels in the Old Testament? Because there's no good news in the Old Testament. And that's just wrong. It is a wrong thing. We have very popular pastors and teachers and leaders now that are saying, oh, the Old Testament, there's nothing in there for us. There's no redemption there in the Old Testament. There's no grace for us in the Old Testament. And it's just not true. That's what happens when you don't follow the thread. Or as we often say, you don't do the work. But if you do the work, you realize that although it looks like this plan gets blown up with we broke it, it's the same plan. I will be your God, you will be my people, and we'll dwell together forever.
And that doing the work is a learned skill, and something that I think that as you watch Theology Threads and as we have these conversations, I think we should keep that kind of first and foremost, is just like helping people do this kind of stuff for themselves, right? Because we don't. Your podcast shouldn't be the full extent of your experience with God's word. You should investigate it for yourself.
Absolutely. And if we want to have like a super practical moment right now, I've already mentioned the Bachman book, Bible and Mission. It's kind of an academic work, but it's interesting. But if you really want to start learning how to do the work, then you should immediately, first finish the podcast.
Yeah.
Don't just watch it for like 8 minutes and then dip off. But finish the whole thing and then immediately go and purchase a copy of How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth.
Is that the name of the book?
The name of the book is How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. And if we were real podcasters, we'd have Amazon affiliate links. But we're just we're just two guys.
We're real podcasters.
Yeah.
We've crossed that threshold.
We're real podcasters. We're real podcasters.
Okay.
But so go find that. And that's how you can start doing the work. We'll put a link to it somewhere, and the team and the producers and their amazing team here will make that happen with their little podcast pixie magic that they have. So when you do it, you begin to see, wait, there's this bigger, broader story that's being told. So now what happens in the New Testament, that's why we go back to my original definition of it being the continuing community of God. You can see continuity between the nation of Israel in the Old Testament and this new kingdom called the church in the New Testament. And one of the most fascinating ways of looking at is in Matthew. So when Matthew starts telling the story of Jesus, the Gospel of Matthew, it'll be the first one in the New Testament. When he starts telling the story of Jesus, he starts not with his lineage to David, not with his lineage. He starts with his lineage to Abraham. So Matthew wants to make a connection that Jesus is continuing the calling and the mission of Abraham to bless the nations. He starts with that. And then he ends the book with what's known as the Great Commission, Matthew 28, which is Jesus' command to disciple in your everyday comings and goings, disciple anyone, everywhere, teaching them and baptizing them, including them.
And it's likely Matthew wrote it that way because his intended audience was the Jewish people.
Right, Jewish people who had either were exploring Christianity or converted to Christianity, but needed to see the Jewishness of this rapidly Gentiling faith. So as the Gentilization of Christianity was coming in, you actually see people saying, hey, this is your story too, don't miss out on it.
Yeah, and this is actually a really big deal.
Yeah.
Like the church almost like splits and has a big giant disagreement about, the inclusion of everybody else, right? So I think is it Paul and Peter that they
have a kerfuffle about it. Paul has a kerfuffle with a lot of people because that's Paul.
Yeah.
But they're driven by this idea. If you will. Yeah. It's appalling, his behavior.
There it
is. Okay. So this idea, though, because there's that, so the tension is who gets to be the people of God? That's the discussion. And Jesus says in John chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in him. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So Jesus seems to be pushing this agenda that anyone who calls on the name of the Lord. So Paul's just running with that. But you have this other group of people saying, no. They don't get to be the church yet. They have to be us before they get to be the church.
And us
being essentially, they have to convert to Judaism in order to become truly Christian.
And circumcision would have been one of those things that they emphasized. But just being Jewish and the culturally Jewish.
So you would have circumcision, you would have had food sacrifice to idols, you would have all sorts of these extra things, and that tension comes out of, but it's related, even though it's a theological nuance about grace and works and all this kind of stuff, the tension is who gets to be the church, who gets to be the people of God now. So when Matthew writes his gospel, he's saying, hey, it starts with Abraham, and it ends with the new Abraham, the real Abraham, the second Abraham, the fullness of Abraham, being a blessing to the nations and sending people into all the world. Because Abraham, this is really cool. Abraham even referred to himself, the kind of old school Bible word was a sojourner. Like he was always a stranger in a strange land.
Because he's originally from an area called
right, which was be more in like Babylon. So he said, I'm not really from here, essentially, even though the land was promised to him and his family, he always remembered. And even in that, God's constantly telling them, remember, you too were once a stranger in a strange land. So when Jesus sends out his disciples, he tells them things like, you need to be on the road, and this is not, you are not of this world, Peter would say later. So even that continuity of we are still nomads metaphysically, spiritually, that we only land in one place, and that's in the planned kingdom of God. And so that plays into tons of things, economically, politically, socially, culturally. There's a reason why we always seem out of sync, and it's because we're the spiritual inheritors, not only of the grace of Abraham, but also of the burden of Abraham to never quite feel at home. Never, it's always kind of be a stranger in a strange land. So that's Abraham. Then we go on to Israel. And what you then see...
Israel the nation?
Israel the nation. Okay. Israel the community. Let's use that word. So then you see most of the New Testament is explaining what the community looks like. Paul is essentially always building this new community. Paul would have seen the church as a new Israel, a new community, which is neither entirely Jewish nor entirely Gentile. It's this other thing. That's a big thing that Bachman brings out in the book. It's this not a third way, because I don't want people to get it confused with Buddhism, but it's this other thing. And so we have the sense of we are this continuing community that's never quite at home, but we're meant to be a blessing to the nations. Now Paul is saying, just like Israel, we're also in between everything around us. There's this passage in Jeremiah. Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah.
But it may be in Isaiah. Where he talks about, the prophet talks about specifically, you're not Assyria and you're not Egypt. You are mine. You are this other kingdom. Israel is my heritage. And so Paul says, you're not this or this, you are this now. So there's this always sense of we're more than just people who agree. We are a nation. We are a people. Peter says the same thing. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. Peter calls them a peculiar or a separate people. So the earliest Christians saw themselves as another thing.
Which kind of on a practical level is one of the reasons why you can go to a different country or a different expression of maybe like, what a worship service looks like. And there's this brotherhood amongst complete strangers because we are a part of this larger community.
Yeah, I think it's always fascinating that the terms we even use with each other are things like brother and sister. They're not Lord and Master. We have one Lord, and the rest of us are just brothers and sisters. We are a family that's deeper and that we're always connected. The other metaphor that Paul strongly uses is body. That we are not only connected, but we are interdependent on each other.
Members of one body.
Members of one body. And that's another podcast for another time, but the idea of gifts and where I fit and all that kind of stuff. So Abraham, Israel, Kingdom of Zion, Old Testament. Matthew, New Testament, New Testament framing of Abraham's legacy. Paul, John, Peter, New Israel. So what is the new kingdom? And that's obviously, well, maybe not obviously. Now we have John's final revelation. So from Genesis to Exodus, or from Genesis to Revelation, this thread goes all the way out. And in fact, the way that it's worded is, I think we actually used this passage in a previous episode. But Revelation 21, as the whole thing's ending, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. First heaven, the first earth had passed away. There is no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God." And it goes on to say, "And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new."
So to pull the thread from the beginning, God made it, and he made it good, and he made it, he made creation for us to enjoy and be in fellowship with him and relationship with him. And then through Adam and Eve, we broke it. We broke that fellowship, and sin and the curse and all these things entered.
And we get cast out of that dwelling place.
Sent out with the promise of I will send to you, the seed. Your seed will bruise the serpent's head.
Yeah, will crush the serpent's head, and you will bruise his heel.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, from the very beginning, there's the gospel. There's the promise. I'll be faithful, and so and then we see that actually happen as Jesus fixes it. He fixes it through his life, death, burial, resurrection. And then now in Revelation, we're talking about this yearning forward to this time where God brings us all back into that fellowship once again.
And what you see is that God has always had people. He's always had a people. When he started, from the day he created Adam and Eve, he's had a community reserved for him. And he's never stopped having one, and he will never stop having one. And so looking at it then is to say that the church is the ongoing, continuing people of God. We now in the church are part of that continuity. Yeah. And that means that we are also called out. We're called out to be something. We're called out to do something. So if we want to know what we're here to do, then we have to look at what are God's people always meant to do on earth, and that is to bless the nations, those who aren't in the kingdom.
Yeah, so the first time, I think it's the first time the word church appears in the New Testament, the Greek word is ekklesia.
Ekklesia,
and, which literally means
the called out ones,
yeah, right?
Yeah, the ones invited to a meeting is kind of the assembly. Yeah.
So called out and distinct, holy, set apart, all these things. But then, it's impossible to define the church as we have without then talking about its function, which is to then share this message with all peoples.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why even in, if you go back and re-listen to the third episode, we talk about the idea of where the God made it, we broke it. And that idea is not new, but when we added the church shares it, it really is a deep belief of mine that part of faithfully obeying and being a Christian is fulfilling the expectations of the community. If I'm included in the community, right? Either through salvation or election, however you get in there. We're not having that episode right now. But through the choice of salvation or election, but mostly through the choice of, through responding to the invitation of God. Now that I'm in, I'm part of the people of God, just as Abraham was, just as Moses was, just as Joshua was. That means it's incumbent upon me, if I'm going to enjoy the blessings that come with being part of the people of God, then I am also out of grace and love, not out of earning it. I also want to respond with the obligations of the people of God. And what is the number one obligation of the people of God? To bless the nations, to point them, the nations, the other, back to the one true God. And so if I'm not doing that, then I am not essentially engaging and enjoying my role, or I'm not fully, I guess I'm not obeying. I mean, I guess I'll just use that word. I'm not obeying the commitment and the obligation of being a part of the family of God.
Yeah, and we don't just look to the Great Commission, because that, you know, that we're following the thread throughout the whole of Scripture. Right. But the Great Commission is a good kind of launching point for the disciples. Yeah. Hey, go therefore, or in your
I have a different way of looking at it. Yeah,
and I'll respect.
But in your coming and going, disciple.
Please.
So the command is to disciple. The command's not to go. The going's assumed. The command in that, and maybe we can do a live or do something where I can show it, because it's easier to show it. And I'm
a visual learner, so
yeah. So, but the command is not to go. The command is actually to disciple. And great conversation about what that even means. It's just literally earlier today having a conversation with someone about discipling. And I think the essence of discipling is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul says, that which has been given to me, I give unto you. Yeah. That's it. So we are just to simply go as God's people as we interact with the nations, and the nations could be your next door neighbor. The nations could be someone from a different community. The nations could be the barista at Starbucks or wherever you get your locally sourced coffee. The neighbor. The nations could be the guy at work that you're not really sure about. Whatever it could be, I'm here to share that which has been given to me, the grace and mercy, the gospel of Jesus Christ, with them.
Right.
Period. And I don't withhold it from them. I don't not share it with them. I don't judge them. I don't look at them. I don't say they're not worthy of it. Because if I have to remember, if I'm tied to Abraham, I have to remember that I too was once a stranger in a strange land.
So I want to ask the question, how then do we go about doing that? Because there's probably many people who have tried to go about doing that. It was very clunky, or came across very, judgmental, or all these things. But let's get to that. But we've already kind of addressed this question. But what the purpose and the mission of the church?
Yeah.
Just to say it. To ask the question, what is the purpose?
So let's do like the formal one that we prepared, and then sort of dive off of that.
Yeah.
So the mission of the church is to bear witness. Acts 1:8, you will receive power and then be my witnesses. So ultimately, the purpose of the church is to bear witness to the reality of God, to worship Him, to bear witness to His message of reconciliation. It is a proclaiming mission. This is where things get a little weird. And by weird, I mean divisive. Do you need to take that, Maya?
No, I'm trying to turn it off. Come on, man, help me out.
It won't turn off. It's an Android. It'll just do whatever it wants to do.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. But what I mean by that is, so great book. I want to introduce it to whoever wants to read it, Richard Niebuhr's Christ in Culture. Okay? Another great book along these lines. So we'll make sure these are all in there, also in like the resource list and everything. Leslie Newbegin's Gospel, and you slow down, Gospel in a Pluralistic Society. 2 incredible books on this. Okay. So if we have Christ, let's go with Niebuhr, right? So if we have Christ and we have culture, what is that interaction? What does Christ have to do with culture? What does Jerusalem, as Augustine said, have to do with Rome? Right? So if the church is a called out community, continuous with the people of God, we are separate. We're holy. Jesus said, we're the city on the hill. We're a light that cannot be hidden. We're the best.
Don't put it under a bushel.
Yeah, don't hide it under a bushel. No. I'm going to let it shine. Right?
Yeah.
Won't let Satan it out.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to let it shine. Right? So we sing it. But what is it? So Niebuhr has this idea of, well, let's talk about it. And there are all these models. So are we called to confront culture? Because there are a lot of people who would say,
right.
Absolutely, we're called to confront culture.
Yeah.
We're going to stand on corners with our signs, and it's going to say horrible things about who God hates, and we're going to call them this because our culture is going to hell. In Alabama, on Highway 64, going north, 64, 65, I want to say 64, in Alabama between Birmingham and Montgomery, actually technically if you're going north, between Montgomery and Birmingham, we'll show you the picture, there's this sign, and it says, go to church or the devil will get you. That would be confrontational, Miles, I would say.
It's not a lot of incentive to go to church.
If you don't want the devil to get you.
If you believe in that sort of thing.
Well, I'm just saying. It's in Alabama. I lived there for a while. A lot of people believe in God. A lot of people believe in the devil, but they ain't going to church, Miles. But that's a whole other conversation.
Now,
anyway,
so is the church a building?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, guy. So we can confront it. And that's Niebuhr's model of Christ against culture. That we have to just challenge culture at every turn, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where you see a lot of like activist churches where they're there to make sure that culture's not getting away with it. So that is a form. So if you take remember our three sort of blocks of like idealism, relativism, and moralism. Mm-hmm. Moralism or legalism as it would be called religiously. So those activist churches, the Christ against, they're moralists.
Yeah, moralists.
They're moralist, right? But what's funny is people say, oh, moralists, you mean like don't sin. No, there are what we would maybe call liberal or progressive activist churches who are just as moralist about tangible sins of this world, justice, equality, identity, equity, all those sorts of things, vital, critical, important. In the same way that you have maybe old school legalistic churches that are challenging the evils of our society, right? Mm-hmm. They're both, in a weird way, doing the exact same thing. They're saying the church is a prophet in the wilderness, it's a voice crying from the wilderness, and it is here to confront,
and that
attack culture.
That gets co-opted into a lot of political agenda. And
I would say nonsense, but sure, we'll go with agenda.
Coming out swinging. Got to keep, all right. So, so that would be one example.
I shouldn't have said nonsense. Okay. But so you have that idea of Christ against culture, which is very confrontational, which has happened. Christ himself, known to be a little confrontational. He just was.
Flipping tables, right? And not like you did at the restaurant. Like he's flipping tables. He's getting mad. He's smacking people around with whips. I mean, he roughed people up a little bit, which was socially appropriate in the day. Oh, man.
Well, he did.
Did he hit anybody? I don't think he hit anybody.
You think he was just swinging it?
Come on, man. He didn't make contact, right? He just cracked the whip a little bit.
Okay, that's a whole other episode. All right,
I guess so.
We have Christ against, but he did. So we can agree he challenged culture.
Certainly,
right?
Yes.
Paul certainly did.
Yeah.
Right? He goes into Ephesus, completely destroys their economic structure because people don't want to worship Artemis anymore. Like he is going after it. So you have Paul going after economic capitalism, the idea of getting money and making as much as you can. You have Jesus going against making money and using the church to profit, like it very confrontational. Then you have Christ of. And this is that idea of no, Christ is the fulfillment of culture. Christ is, and this is sort of an idealism. So if one is moralism, this is sort of the idealism, that Christ is the ultimate expression of human culture and human art and human ideas. He's the great teacher. He's the great philosopher who's going to lead us out of all of this. And so that's where Christ becomes just the best version of all of us. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, Jesus is my homeboy.
Yeah, a little bit of that. Jesus is my homeboy, buddy Jesus, that type of thing. Like, Jesus is just a great guy, let's party with Jesus. Oh, he's the friend of sinners. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is true.
True statement, right.
Right, so the same Jesus who tossed those tables, right, is the same Jesus who was a friend of sinners.
Right, he's both, which is a paradox, but one that we hold in tension.
We hold in tension because he is not, we cannot reduce him to the one thing.
Yeah, because he does say, I came to bring a sword?
Yeah, he said, I've got you. People who follow me will find themselves just to sort of make it a little accessible, he's essentially saying people who follow me will come to find themselves separated from family, at odds with the world around them. Why? Because we are being invited into a called out community.
And that doesn't rub, every
Every single one of us.
Right, exactly. And for, specifically just to park on that family bit, because that can be really difficult, for a lot of people. It's because the truths that we hold and the belief that we have is offensive to those who maybe have not had that revelation yet. That have not been, maybe they have a skewed understanding of what the church is and the mission because they've seen these other expressions that we've been talking about. And so because of that, they're like, oh, you're just here to hit me over the head with the Bible, or you just something, or they know a lot about your history because they're family. And so like, okay, you're just saying that because you're coping because you had troubles with, alcoholism or something.
Right. It's Marx called religion the opiate of the masses. You're just using religion to soothe yourself, or you don't want to face reality, right? And that's why Paul Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Now, I just grabbed a Bible off the shelf, so I'm pretty sure I'm reading from the King James. So just hang in there, okay?
All right, I'll try.
All right. He says this, for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God. So if the mission of the church is to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, then yes, it's going to sound a little crazy.
Almost even upside down.
Upside down, absolutely. This upside down thing, right? He says this, for it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring nothing to understanding of the prudent. But right now, Paul says, where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? So in Jesus Christ, you have essentially this idea, this person, not even an idea, this person that makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. He's the ultimate power in the universe. He is the strongest. He is God, and yet here he is being born as a little baby.
Right.
He cries, he laughs, he eats fish, like we talked about. He incarnates all of this power. And so Paul is making this point that says that really messes everybody up, right? It messes everybody up.
Well, because the disciples, when he first comes on the scene, they're assuming he's coming to reclaim Israel.
Yeah, with a fire, with the fire in his eyes and a sword in his hand.
Because they're occupied by the Roman Empire.
Right. Yep.
And so they're thinking the liberation that he's bringing is freeing them from this Roman threat.
It's an imminent, tangible, temporal freedom from oppression that they think he's bringing them. That's why it says this in verse 22 of 1 Corinthians 1. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. So he's talking about just stereotypical understandings of how they rule the world. But we preach Christ crucified. Unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. But unto both of them, which are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. So for the Jews, the stumbling block was the message of the cross, the idea that the Messiah would die. For the Greeks or the Gentiles, the idea that a God could die was complete and utter nonsense. So Paul says, ultimately, the mission of this community is to help you understand that the universe really doesn't work the way you think it works, that power isn't what you think it is, that salvation isn't what you think it is. And all of these realities that you are trying, culture, whatever that means, by the way, I'm just using that word loosely in Niebuhr's sense, that culture will try to solve this in any other way it possibly can. It'll try to solve it through what? Wisdom. It'll try to solve it through power. It'll try to solve it through economics. It'll try to solve it through art and beauty and enlightenment. And Paul is essentially saying none of that works. The only thing that can save us is Jesus Christ. And the fact that he died, you're going to have to accept that to get this thing going. So then the message of the church becomes, right? The message of the church becomes that message. And it can't get co-opted by politics. It can't get co-opted by economics. It can't get co-opted by even social compassion or just, it can be used in those things, right? But it can't be run by those things.
Yeah, and the reason why, well, I'm going to speculate here. I'm speculating that the reason why so many attempt to co-opt it, because that message has a tremendous amount of power in it. Because look at world history, Christianity exploded once the church got a hold of that. All right, it's to share with the nations. The Roman Empire found that quite offensive.
Yeah.
Quite offensive to their Roman gods and the way that they did things, and so they oppressed Christians, and many were martyred, thrown into the Colosseums, all these things, and but then you can't keep Jesus, you can't keep Christianity.
No, you
concealed.
can't keep Jesus in the grave.
Yeah, you can't keep, because he's and so. We see this explosion of Christianity, and it overtakes is probably not the right word, but Rome is transformed.
Yeah, and so even to the point of, but look at like what some of the earliest critics of the church, and you can find all this kind of stuff, information online, and the one specific guy's name escapes me, but he says in he's like, they can't really be good. I mean, look, the poor eat with the rich, slaves eat with their masters, like. What kind of crazy society? Men and women are treated the same. They consider the possessions belong to everyone. What kind of insanity is this, is what they said. Marcus Aurelius, this whole new great Stoic movement, especially like young men are really into, and I see a lot of Christians get into like Stoicism, which is fine, whatever. But Marcus Aurelius thought that Christians were idiots. He called them vermin that were willing to die for their faith. What kind of ridiculousness is that? And it's because the message of the cross refuses to be co-opted by cultural values, that if you do it, you either distort the cross so much that it's really just still a cultural value, okay? Or that cultural value can't withhold it. And what happens is people want their cultural value more than the cross. And so they'll walk away.
Yeah, and we have to if we have to admit that. Well, taking inventory of our beliefs, right? We have to admit that is something that is distinct from the gospel, and it has to become,
subordinate to it.
That's exactly the word. Yeah, exactly. Subordinate to.
So if we go back to the What Do Christians Really Believe episode, we talk about it being the root. The gospel, Jesus is Lord and God has raised him from the dead, that is the root. My social concern filters through Jesus. My moral outrage over whatever's going on in the United States has to filter through Jesus. How I spend my money has to filter through Jesus. My sexual ethics, all those, they have to filter through Jesus. I can't make that one thing the root and then try to get Jesus into that. I have to place Jesus in the middle. And the reason the church gets wonky, the reason the church gets out of kilter is because we try to move Jesus to another part of the agenda. Or we try to co-opt Jesus onto a social or personal or intellectual or whatever type of agenda, and then it simply does not work that way. So Niebuhr's final answer to that is Christ above, right? Christ above. So Christ actually is the fulfillment of the best things. Christ is but he's also always separate from culture. You can't co-opt him. And ultimately, Christ is here to transform our culture. Christ is here to transform us and transform our culture. So the church's role is to be participants and partners in that Jesus is the one doing the work, and we partner and participate in it. As Paul says, he is the heir, but we are co-heirs. We are co-laborers with Christ. And when we try to do the work, we usually don't do it well apart from Jesus. But when we say we're going to go in the authority and in the heart and in the spirit and in the mindset of Jesus Christ, then we do the amazing things that the church is capable of doing. And when you look through history, Miles, the church is, because of Jesus, the church is capable of doing amazing things. But without Jesus, the church is capable of doing horrific things.
Terrible things, yeah. There's two ways to look at that. There's the church, like, church does transform Rome, but then again, the mission gets co-opted,
right,
and it becomes this oppressive power. And so, and you can look at it from like the church being this large global thing, or you could look at the church like how have I missed it, like
Right.
as an individual. So the church being me versus the church being just this organization. Or
Yeah,
something.
because I think it's easy to listen to something like this and be like, "You're right, Miles and Brian. The church is the church." But if I'm part of the community of God, every time I say the church, I'm saying I. You know, I don't remember the first time I heard it, but I just heard somebody say one time, don't forget that whenever you say, oh, the church should reach people more, you're saying I should reach people more.
Yeah.
When you say the church should do more for the poor, you're saying I should do more for the poor. When you're saying that the church should serve widows in our community better, you're saying I should serve widows in my community better. Because when we say the church shares it, because we are the church, we are saying we should share it individually.
So yeah, that's uncomfortable though, right?
Very
Because it
uncomfortable.
demands something from me. I have to participate instead of just criticize, which we're very good at.
Oh, we're very good at criticizing.
Especially with
observing, I think is the word you're looking for. Right?
Is that no? I didn't know that's a thing.
No. I was being facetious. But this idea of,
yeah.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just, we say goofy stuff like that all the time. I'm just keeping it real. You know me. I'm telling it like it. No, I think you're just being critical and you're not engaging. So what do we do then is we have to say then, okay, within the church, what is my mission? Now, you can't have a separate mission from the church. So if I'm saying what is my calling or what is my purpose in the church, ultimately it's a form of disciple everyone, whoever you come in contact with. Ultimately, it's bearing witness. That's what it is.
So what does that look like? Bearing witness or discipling? What does that look like for someone who works in, Soto area or...
That's southern downtown for our international
Is that what that stands for?
Yeah, it's
Soto
the
is
southern part
downtown?
it's the southern part of
Oh,
downtown
wow.
Seattle.
I never knew that. That just, Soto is like a name.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Who says you don't learn anything here on Theology Threads?
In blue collar, white collar,
I'm
whatever.
at the Port of Seattle.
Yeah, Port of Seattle.
Yeah.
You're downtown. You're managing accounts, or you're in retail.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, what does that look like? And I use a lot of workplace instances right there. But even in your family, or if you're a young person in your school, your class, how do you go about doing this thing called bearing witness, about discipling?
So I'm going to get number one. That may be the most important question we've actually ever tried to answer on this show is how do you actually bear witness? Okay, so there's a couple of different ways. One is I like Paul's language in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23-ish. That which has been given to me, I give unto you. Here's what Jesus did in my life. I'm going to share it with you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to teach you. I'm going to share it with you. So there's that. Secondly, you look at the man born blind in John chapter 9. He says, one of the verses that he says when they're interrogating him about Jesus, he says, look, whether he has a demon, I don't know. All I know is I once was blind and now I can see. What is he doing? He's sharing his story, right? We have the woman at the well in John 4. Come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. We have Nathaniel and Philip in John chapter 1. Come and see. All of these guys and this woman are simply sharing their story. That's it. So if I'm trying to share, I'm going to bear witness to what I've seen and what I've experienced. That's what a witness does. If you put a witness on the stand at a trial, they're going to testify about what they have seen the defendant or whatever do. So if Jesus is on trial in our culture and you're called to testify on his behalf, and they ask the question, what has Jesus ever done for you? What did Jesus do to you? And that's when you start sharing. And I know I don't have the theology right, or I can't debate religions, or what if the person doesn't believe in God? That's not on you. I really want people to know that's not on you. You share the story. You share the story. You incarnate.
And right, and it's you don't have to become this great apologetic,
right, yeah.
Apologetic meaning
defender of the faith.
Defender of the faith, right? Because that's not the burden. It's just, what has Jesus done for you?
Yeah.
In your life?
Yeah. So that idea of bearing witness, you go to the first part, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses. And so part of it's asking God for his Spirit to empower you, whatever theologically that looks like for you. I have a very specific worldview on that. Others may not. But whatever that looks like for you, you can't deny that somehow the Spirit of God is connected to the ability, the empowerment to witness, to bear witness. And then I go back to, there's a Danish philosopher, Christian guy, whose name was Søren Kierkegaard. And he talks about the idea of being a witness versus being a teacher. And I've always been kind of pushed by that because, I'm a teacher and my spiritual gift is teaching. Blah, 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 blah. But a teacher is an expert telling you how it is. A witness is somebody sharing what they've experienced. So don't worry about being a teacher. Just be a witness.
Yeah.
That which has been given to me, I give unto you.
Right. And that's that, going back to that same thought, that you're not asked to defend this large, breadth of knowledge of the Bible and, well, what about this and, creation and all these different, questions people might have. You're simply just sharing your own story.
Yeah.
And who could, if I was sharing my story, someone say to me, well, that's not true, or like no one would say something like,
not anymore,
you're wrong, or especially.
But think about it. Like everything's relative now, and you have your truth and I have my truth. That's this incredible blessing to the church, because now you can genuinely say, hey, this is just what happened to me. This is what I believe to be true about my own life. And we're actually in a society that honors that more than they've ever honored that statement.
Yeah, there's a hidden benefit of this subjectivity.
We want to get in this thing where, so we talk about Christ versus culture, Christ against culture, Christ above culture. Why don't we let Christ transform that concept and use it in our witness to say, look, I understand this may mean nothing to you. I understand that you may not even agree with it, but I can't deny what I know has happened in my life. And that's, I believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ, and it has given me peace. That's it. And so, but when we plant the seed and we're trusting that he is the one, again, 1 Corinthians, that he is the one bringing the increase, all I have to do is plant the seed and water it. And then when the moment of harvest comes, be ready. Peter says in First Peter, always be prepared to give an account of the hope you have. Just be ready. Just be ready. Be ready to talk about it. Be ready to share it. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Live in it, because it's not you anyway. It's Christ in you.
Yeah, I think some people get this perception that they have to then memorize maybe the Romans Road, Romans Road being like this passages in Romans that talks about kind of coming to faith in Jesus Christ and stuff, or
the way of the master, evangelism explosion.
Yeah, any of these things. And since I am a pastor at a church, I get to have those moments, and they're actually quite beautiful, and I love that. But I love your description just in your comings and goings, a disciple. And, it can be both, an intentional, like, hey, I'm going to make sure, all right, today I'm going to work and I'm going to make sure I talk to Carl about this or whatever. Yeah. It could be something intentional like that, or it could be very unintentional, that you're just doing life with people, and then someone shares that they had something happen in their family or whatever, and you offer to pray for them, or you maybe take that moment to say, like, hey, you may be open to this idea or not, but what gives me peace in these moments is knowing, X, Y, Z, and then here's my story. Like, it can be very...
my church is going through this series. I think it would really help you. I know what you're going through, Carl, and my church is going through this series. I'd love to take you to my church one time, just so you can kind of experience it and hear what they're talking about.
Or I find this podcast very interesting.
Yeah, or share this podcast with somebody.
Podcast.
Yeah.
So,
but I think the part of that, Miles, is we think, I got to be, okay, I'm going to pray. And you don't have to be weird. You say, hey, if it's all right, my faith teaches me to pray. Is that okay? Can I pray with you? And I think you'd be shocked at how many people say yes versus no.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we think we have to be weird about, and I have to have all this memorized, and, you have a God-shaped hole in your heart. Let me introduce you to my best friend. His name is Jesus Christ. Like, all of these things.
Yeah, as a student, it was like, get up on the table during lunch and start, shouting at everyone.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe someday, but right now, to just the powerful witness of a person that they know and trust in their life to say, this is incredibly important to me. Because you would share it if it was your favorite restaurant.
Right.
You would share it if it was your favorite band. You would share it if it was your favorite podcast. Click on the share button. Like, we share things we love all the time.
Right.
Dude, you got to have this app.
Memes.
It changed my life. Memes, we share it all the time, right? We share things we love all the time, but when it comes to Jesus, I don't want to offend anybody. Come on. It's not that. It's that something about us is confronted and we're scared. And Jesus says, but I can give you power to do that. I can give you power to do that. Just pray. I mean, one of the biggest hallmarks of the baptism of the Spirit in the book of Acts is boldness. It talks about boldness. And again, not boldness to be a jerk.
Right.
This isn't a jerk license, It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's to say, I just have to be bold enough to just say, hey, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. That's a big deal in my world. And then letting it be, right? Letting it be and being driven by the reality that there's a consequence to the breaking of the world. And that's eternity without God. And letting that reality, by the way, speak to us, because that's the reality that took Jesus on his mission to the cross. And we have to be driven by that reality. That we do believe theologically that people without God, as they enter into eternity, are lost forever. We believe that. We can debate about the nuances of that all day long. We believe that. So I need to be involved in that not happening. I think back to this episode of Seinfeld, believe it or not, where Elaine and Putty are in a relationship and they start talking about, and Putty starts talking about being religious. And Elaine says, are you religious? He goes, oh yeah, I'm religious. She goes, I'm not really religious. And then they talk about it and he goes, I really don't care that you're not religious. And she says, well, why not? And he says, you're the one going to hell, not me. And then she says this line that, as silly as it is, has seared into my soul. And she says this, Elaine looks at Putty and she says, if you believe I'm going to hell, you should care that I'm going to hell. And all of the moral outrage and all of the indignation about the state of the country or the state of this person's sin or this group of people or that community or blah, 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 blah. And then we do nothing to share the life-saving, rescuing gospel of Jesus Christ, that we cheer and laugh from the water's edge as our culture is drowning in its own sin.
So that's a metaphor that is ingrained in my brain, is that this idea that I have been rescued. Mm-hmm. I'm on the boat and I've experienced what it is to be drowning and suffering and all these things. And I see around me a sea of people that are in that situation. And I have a life preserver. And instead of throwing that out and not throwing it at people's heads, and beating them over it with it, but I'm like afraid or ashamed of it. It's like, are you kidding me? This is the thing that has saved me.
Yeah.
Why would I be ashamed? Why wouldn't I want to throw it out? There's a very beautiful moment in Schindler's List. I'm sure you're familiar with the scene where, what is the name of the actor?
In Schindler's List?
Well, it's Schindler, so I'll just say Schindler.
Oscar Schindler, yeah.
Yeah, so he's...
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, yes. And so at the very end, he's got this cohort of Jews that he's rescued from being sent off into the chambers and all these things, right? And so he's seeing this, and he's like, he's seeing all these number of people, but then he like looks down at like the ring on his finger, and he's like, this could have been 3 more people.
Yeah.
Like he was basically using money to like buy out, to help these people escape. And he looks at the car, this could have been 8 more people, and he has this mental breakdown. And I never want to get to the end of my life where I thought I could have done more, and I was fearful of sharing this message that will save people. So.
Yeah, I think of the idea of, I can't save the world. You're right. You can't save the world, but you can make a difference in your world.
Yeah.
And I think just accepting that burden. And so the church is here to share this beautiful, this incredible message of Jesus Christ. But if the church is here to share it, I'm here to share it. And I think of someone who may have started following our podcast or following the material who's not quite connected to Jesus yet. You're still discovering. And you're wondering, well, do I have a place in the church? Is this burden on me? Or what does this mean to me? I don't even know if I follow Jesus yet. And to me, it would just be the invitation to come and see. Come and see. And if you wonder if the church can do that, yes, the church has been complicit in horrible things, the Crusades and slavery in the United States and the churches, but those are all versions of Christianity where people weren't actually following Jesus. They weren't doing what the master, the teacher said. But when the church does do what the master, the teacher says, then you have William Wilberforce in England leading the charge for the abolition of the slave trade in the English Empire. You have Blaise Pascal doing math. You have people healing the sick. The very first hospitals were created by Christians to provide suffering for ill people. Yeah. You have Christians constantly healing the sick. You have people giving their lives up to live amongst the poor, dying of the same diseases, literally sharing in the suffering of others again and again and again. You have Amy Semple McPherson in California at the San Francisco earthquake, and she gets there before the Red Cross gets there because she's so committed.
Yeah, you have the schools and universities,
right?
Puritans, and so you have the church leading the charge in beautiful things.
You have the church educating, you have the church freeing, you have the church raising the dignity of human beings all over the world. So if you're a secularist or you're maybe a spiritual but not religious and you have questions about the church, sure, expressions of the church, yeah, I get it. I can't deny that. But when the church is actually doing the mission it was set to do, that's the church we want you to look at, not this off-mission organization that has church in the title of it, but the true continuing community of God's people who are called out from the culture around it to point people back to Him.
So I'm going to shoehorn the quote in at the very end because we didn't lead with it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But it says to preach the gospel at all times and use words if necessary. I think we'll end there.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, and please take a second to like and subscribe for notifications, follow us on social media, and share this conversation with friends, and leave a 5-star review so your friends can find us. Thank you, Dr. Brian.
Yeah,
pleasure.
Always share it.